I stood frozen in the hallway of my son's house, my hand trembling against the cold wall, my entire body locked in a moment that would change everything. The casserole dish I had brought for dinner, chicken and rice, Matthew's favorite since he was 7 years old, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. But it wasn't the weight of the dish that made my arms shake. It was the voice drifting through the half-open bedroom door. Her voice. Sarah's voice. My daughter-in-law. The woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms and an open heart. As soon as we sell the house, we're out of here. Those 7 words. 7 simple words that shattered my world like a hammer through glass. I had arrived early that Tuesday afternoon, perhaps 30 minutes before I had told them I would come. Traffic had been lighter than expected, and I was eager to see my son, to spend time with the young couple who had seemed so happy, so perfect together. Sarah had always been so gracious, so warm. She called me every Sunday just to chat. She remembered my birthday without prompting. She had held my hand at my husband's funeral 2 years ago and told me she would always be there for me. And now I was hearing her voice, soft and intimate, speaking to someone who was definitely not my son. "I know, baby," she continued, and I felt my stomach twist into knots. "Just a few more months of playing the perfect wife, and we'll have everything. The house is almost sold. He doesn't suspect a thing. Why would he? He trusts me completely." She laughed then. A light, carefree laugh that made my blood run cold because there was no guilt in it, no hesitation, just pure satisfaction at her own cleverness. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. I pressed myself harder against the wall, grateful that the hallway was carpeted and my footsteps had been silent. My heart was hammering so violently I was certain she would hear it, that the sound of my pulse would give me away. But she kept talking, oblivious to my presence, secure in her deception. "The closing is scheduled for November 15th. Matthew will be in Seattle for that conference, so he'll sign the papers remotely. He trusts me to handle all the details. Isn't that sweet?" Another laugh. "Derek, stop, you're terrible. Yes, I'll tell him the house sold for market value. He'll never know your company bought it for 40% less. By the time he figures anything out, we'll be gone. New city, new life, new everything." I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst through that door and tear her apart with my bare hands. I wanted to shake my son awake from whatever spell this woman had cast over him. But something held me back. Perhaps it was shock. Perhaps it was the survival instinct that told me I needed to be smart about this. That raw emotion would accomplish nothing. Before I continue with what happened next, I need to ask you something that would mean the world to me. Tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. This community, your presence here, your willingness to listen to these stories, it's what keeps this channel alive. It's what reminds me that I'm not alone in having experienced betrayal and heartbreak. So please, take a moment and let me know where you are. It helps more than you could possibly imagine. I backed away from that door as silently as I had approached. My hands were shaking so badly that the casserole dish rattled, and I had to grip it tighter to stop the noise. Step by step, I retreated down the hallway, through the living room where photographs of my son and Sarah smiled at me from every surface, mocking me with their false happiness. I made it to the front door, opened it as quietly as possible, and stepped back outside into the bright afternoon sunlight that suddenly felt wrong, too cheerful, too normal for what I had just learned. I set the casserole dish on the front porch. I couldn't take it with me. I couldn't do anything except get away from that house, away from her voice, away from the truth that was burning through my chest like acid. My car was parked on the street. I walked to it in a daze, my mind replaying those words over and over. Just a few more months of playing the perfect wife. How long had this been going on? How long had she been manipulating my son, playing him for a fool, planning his destruction while sleeping in his bed and eating at his table? I sat in my car for what felt like hours, what was probably only minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I tried to breathe normally, tried to calm the rage and fear and horror swirling through me. Matthew, my son, my only child. The boy I had raised alone after his father died. The man who had worked so hard to build a life, to buy that beautiful house, to create something meaningful. And this woman was planning to take it all. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling of my own home, the house my husband and I had built together, the place where Matthew had grown up. The walls held so many memories. First steps, birthday parties, high school graduations, late-night talks about dreams and fears. And now those memories were tainted by the knowledge that my son was living with a woman who saw him as nothing more than a mark, a target, a stepping stone to her own happiness. By the time the sun rose on Wednesday morning, I had made my decision. I had to tell Matthew. He deserved to know the truth. He was my son, and no matter how painful it would be, I couldn't stand by and watch him be destroyed. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly imagined in my worst nightmares, was that telling the truth would make me the villain, that trying to save my son would cost me everything, that Sarah's greatest weapon wasn't her lover or her lies, but her ability to make everyone believe that I was the problem. The war was about to begin, and I was about to lose every battle before I could win the war. I called Matthew at 8 o'clock Wednesday morning. My voice was steady, controlled, even though inside I was screaming. I had practiced what I would say, rehearsed it 12 times in my head. Matthew, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something very important. Can you come over? Just you, please. It needs to be private. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, asking who was calling. My stomach clenched. Is everything okay, Mom? You sound serious. I'm fine, I really need to see you, alone, please. He agreed. Said he'd come by after lunch, around 1 o'clock. I spent the hours until then pacing my living room, trying to figure out the best way to tell him. How do you tell your child that the person they love, the person they've built their life around, is betraying them in the worst possible way? When Matthew arrived, I saw the concern in his eyes. He had always been intuitive, sensitive to other people's emotions. It was one of the things that made him such a good person, such a kind soul. And it was exactly what Sarah had exploited. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? We sat down in the living room and I took his hands in mine. They were strong hands, capable hands. The hands that had helped me plant the garden after his father died, that had fixed my leaky sink last month, that had held mine when I cried. Yesterday afternoon I came by your house to drop off dinner, I began, my voice carefully controlled. I arrived earlier than I said I would. The door was unlocked, so I came in. And Matthew, I heard something. I heard Sarah on the phone. I told him everything, every word I had overheard. The lover named Derek. The plan to sell the house below market value to Derek's company. The scheme to take the money and disappear. I spoke clearly, without embellishment, sticking to exactly what I had heard. And then my son laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't an uncertain chuckle. It was a full, dismissive laugh that made my blood run cold and my heart sink into my stomach. Mom, seriously, you think Sarah is having an affair? Matthew, I heard her. With my own ears. She was talking to someone named Derek, planning to what? Run away with some imaginary boyfriend? He stood up, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration I recognized from his teenage years. This is ridiculous. Sarah loves me. We're happy together. We're planning our future. I know what I heard. Do you? He turned to face me, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen before when he looked at me. Doubt, suspicion. Or did you hear a conversation and jump to the worst possible conclusion because you can't accept that I have someone else in my life now? The words hit me like a physical blow. How dare you suggest I would make this up? I'm your mother. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From being happy? From having a wife who loves me? His voice rose, something that rarely happened. Matthew had always been even-tempered, calm. I know you've been lonely since Dad died. I know it's been hard adjusting to life without him, but Mom, this is too much. This is paranoid. Paranoid? I felt tears stinging my eyes. I'm not paranoid. I'm not making this up. I heard her, Matthew. She has a lover. She's planning to steal everything from you. Stop. He held up his hand. Just stop. I can't believe you would accuse Sarah of something so horrible without any proof. You know what? Maybe you should talk to someone about this. A therapist. Someone who can help you work through whatever's going on. Nothing is going on. I'm trying to save you from a woman who is lying to you. The only person lying here is you. His voice was cold now, distant. Sarah is my wife. I trust her. And right now, I'm having a really hard time trusting you. He left. Just walked out of my house, closing the door behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty rooms. I stood there, frozen, my heart shattered into a million pieces. But the nightmare was only beginning. That evening, my phone started ringing. First it was my sister, Ellen, her voice full of concern. Honey, Matthew called me. He said you made some really serious accusations about Sarah. Are you feeling okay? Has the grief been getting to you? Then my cousin, Patricia. I heard you've been struggling lately. If you need someone to talk to. Then my brother-in-law, then a family friend, then another relative. One after another, people calling with the same message. They had heard I was having problems, that I had made wild accusations, that I might need help. Sarah had moved fast. She had gotten ahead of the story, painted me as an unstable, grief-stricken widow who was jealous of her son's happiness. And everyone, every single person, believed her. By Friday, when we had the family dinner we hosted once a month, the atmosphere was thick with judgment and pity. I almost didn't go. I stood in my closet, staring at my clothes, wondering if I could just stay home and avoid the whispers and the awkward glances. But I went. Because hiding would only confirm their suspicions. Because I needed to see my son, even if he wouldn't look at me. The dinner was torture. Sarah played her part perfectly. She was extra kind to me, touching my arm gently, asking how I was doing with such false concern, it made me want to vomit. She brought me a plate of food, without being asked. She complimented my dress. She was the picture of a caring, patient daughter-in-law dealing with a difficult mother-in-law, and everyone bought it completely. I watched her work the room, watched her manipulate every conversation, every gesture. It was a masterclass in deception, and I was helpless to stop it. When I tried to speak to my sister alone, to explain what I had heard, she gently suggested that maybe I should take some time for myself and consider talking to a professional. Matthew avoided me completely. When I finally cornered him in the kitchen, he looked at me with such disappointment it took my breath away. Mom, I think it's best if we spend some time apart. Matthew, please, just listen to me. I have listened, and unless you're ready to apologize to Sarah and get some help, I don't think we should see each other for a while. That night, alone in my house for the third night in a row, I broke down completely. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. I cried for my son, for his blindness, for the trap he was walking into. I cried for myself, for being dismissed and doubted and painted as the villain in a story where I was trying to be the hero. But somewhere in the darkness, between the tears and the rage and the crushing despair, something else emerged, something cold and hard and determined. If words wouldn't save my son, then evidence would. If no one would believe what I heard, then I would give them something impossible to deny. I would document every lie, gather every proof, build a case so ironclad that even Sarah's perfect performance couldn't explain it away. I would fight for my son, even if he didn't want me to. Even if it cost me everything. Even if I had to wage this war completely alone. Because that's what mothers do. We fight for our children, even when they don't believe we need to. Have you ever been in a position where telling the truth made you the bad guy? Where doing the right thing turned everyone against you? Share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is what gives us the strength to keep going. They say patience is a virtue, but I learned it's also a weapon. A weapon that requires discipline, strategy, and an iron will to wield correctly. For 3 months, I endured a kind of torture I wouldn't wish on anyone. At family gatherings, I smiled through the pitying glances and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. I played the role they had assigned me, the difficult mother-in-law who was slowly, reluctantly learning to respect boundaries and accept her son's marriage. But while they saw a defeated woman gradually coming to terms with her paranoia, I was building something else, entirely. I was constructing an arsenal of truths, piece by piece, evidence by evidence, proof by undeniable proof. The first call I made was to a private investigator. His name was Robert Chen, and he came highly recommended by my lawyer friend, Margaret, who I had confided in about the situation. Robert was in his 50s, professional, discreet, and utterly unflappable when I told him what I needed. I need you to follow my daughter-in-law, I said, sitting across from him in his modest office downtown. I need photographic evidence of her affair. I need documentation of everywhere she goes, everyone she meets. I need proof that will hold up legally. He didn't blink, didn't judge, just pulled out a contract and explained his rates and methods. Within 2 weeks, Robert confirmed what I already knew in my bones. Sarah was having an affair with Derek Chambers, a real estate developer she had met at a conference 6 months earlier. Robert's initial report included photographs of them at restaurants in the next town over, always careful to choose places where Matthew's friends or colleagues wouldn't see them. There were images of them entering a hotel together, staying for 2 to 3 hours, then leaving separately. Time-stamped, dated, irrefutable. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. Adultery alone might end the marriage, but it wouldn't save Matthew from the financial destruction Sarah was planning. I needed more. I needed to expose the entire scheme. I need you to dig deeper, I told Robert at our second meeting. Find out everything you can about Derek Chambers, his business, his properties, his financial dealings, especially anything connected to real estate purchases in our area. Robert delivered beyond my expectations. Within another month, he had uncovered the full scope of Sarah's plan. Derek Chambers owned a shell company called Heritage Properties, LLC. That company was the one preparing to purchase Matthew and Sarah's house. The appraised value of the property was $375,000. Heritage Properties was offering $230,000. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Matthew would think he was getting a fair deal from a legitimate company. Sarah would handle all the paperwork, all the details. The closing was scheduled for when Matthew would be out of town at a conference. He would sign remotely, trusting his wife to manage everything correctly. And then Sarah and Derek would disappear with the profits, leaving my son with nothing but a fraction of what the house was worth and a mountain of debt from the mortgage he still owed. But I wasn't done gathering evidence. Through Robert and through my own careful investigation, I discovered something else. Sarah had been systematically isolating Matthew from his friends. She had convinced him that his best friend from college was toxic and holding him back. She had created friction between him and his work colleagues by making subtle comments about how they didn't appreciate him enough. She had even tried to distance him from me, and that had worked all too well. Every discovery made me angrier, but I channeled that anger into focus, into preparation, into building an unassailable case. I consulted extensively with Margaret, my lawyer friend. She helped me understand exactly what Sarah was doing from a legal perspective and where she was vulnerable. What she's planning is fraud, Margaret explained over coffee one afternoon. If you can prove she knowingly sold the property below market value to benefit herself and her accomplice, that's criminal fraud. The fact that the buyer is her lover's company makes it even clearer, but you need ironclad documentation. I have photographs, financial records. What else do I need? Audio would help. If you could get a recording of her discussing the plan. That's when I made a decision that some might consider extreme. I went back to Matthew's house on a day I knew they would both be at work. I still had a key from the days when I used to water their plants when they traveled. I let myself in, and I installed recording devices in the common areas of the house. Margaret had assured me this was legal. As someone who had contributed 40% of the down payment on the house, I was technically a part owner, even if my name wasn't on the deed. That gave me certain rights, including the right to install security devices in common areas. The devices were small, unobtrusive, voice-activated, and within a week, they captured exactly what I needed. Sarah's voice, crystal clear. Just a few more months of playing the perfect wife, and we'll have everything. Matthew's so trusting. He believes every word I say. Sometimes I almost feel bad. Almost. Derek's voice in response. Don't feel bad. He'll be fine. He's got his mommy to take care of him. Their laughter, cold, mocking, cruel. I sat in my living room listening to that recording on my laptop, and I felt something shift inside me. Any remaining doubt, any lingering hope that maybe I had misunderstood, vanished completely. Sarah wasn't just unfaithful, she was evil. She was taking pleasure in destroying my son. During these 3 months, I maintained my role perfectly. I attended family dinners and acted appropriately chastened. I didn't bring up Sarah's affair again. I didn't argue with Matthew about his wife. I smiled when required, stayed quiet when expected, and generally behaved like a woman who had learned her lesson. Sarah grew more confident, more bold. She thought she had won. At one dinner, she actually winked at me when no one else was looking, a tiny gesture of triumph that said, "I beat you. I turned your son against you, and there's nothing you can do about it." I smiled back. Let her think she had won. Let her grow complacent. Let her believe that I had given up. Because the truth was, I had never been more focused in my life. Every day, I reviewed my evidence. Every night, I planned my next move. I consulted with Margaret about legal strategies. I made sure every document was in order, every photograph was properly dated, every recording was clear and legally obtained. The closing was scheduled for November 15th. Matthew would be in Seattle from November 13th through the 16th for a business conference. Sarah had volunteered to handle the closing by herself, claiming she wanted to take this burden off his shoulders so he could focus on his career. How thoughtful of her. I marked November 15th on my calendar in red ink. That was the day everything would change. That was the day I would walk into that closing and detonate the truth like a bomb that would blow Sarah's perfect life to pieces. But I had to be patient. I had to wait. I had to let her think she was safe right up until the moment I destroyed her. They thought I was defeated. They thought I had accepted my place as the paranoid mother-in-law who had been proven wrong. They thought I had faded into the background, irrelevant and dismissed. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that while they planned their escape, I was planning their exposure. No idea that the woman they had mocked and marginalized had spent every single day preparing for this moment with the precision of a chess master moving pieces across a board. The night before the closing, I barely slept. I went over everything one more time. The photographs organized chronologically, the financial documents showing the fraud, the recordings of Sarah and Derek discussing their plan, the property appraisal proving the house was worth far more than the sale price, the legal documents Margaret had prepared for me. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. At 9:55 a.m. on November 15th, I would walk into that conference room with my briefcase full of evidence, and nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah thought she had won the war, but she had only won a few battles. The war was about to end in her complete and utter defeat, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The morning of November 15th dawned cold and clear, the kind of autumn day where the sky is impossibly blue and the air bites with the promise of winter. I woke at 5 a.m., not because of an alarm, but because my body wouldn't let me sleep anymore. 3 months of planning, 3 months of gathering evidence, 3 months of silent suffering had led to this single moment. I dressed carefully, a navy blue suit, professional and authoritative. Pearl earrings my late husband had given me for our 20th anniversary. Low heels that wouldn't make noise but added height and presence. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked harder than I felt, stronger, more dangerous. Good. I arrived at the real estate office at 9:45, 15 minutes early. The building was downtown, one of those renovated historical structures with exposed brick and modern glass. I sat in my car for those 15 minutes, breathing deeply, going over everything one more time in my mind. Margaret had reviewed all the documents the night before and assured me everything was legally sound. Robert had delivered his final report, complete with surveillance logs and photographs. Everything I needed was in the briefcase on the passenger seat. At 9:55, I walked into the building. The receptionist looked surprised to see me, but directed me to conference room B on the 3rd floor. I took the elevator, my heart pounding but my hands steady. This was it, the moment of truth, literally. When I opened the door to the conference room at exactly 10 a.m., the expressions on their faces were priceless. The room was elegant, all dark wood and leather chairs, the kind of space where important transactions happen and lives change course. Seated at the long table were Sarah, her lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit named Richard Thornton, the realtor, a woman in her 40s named Amanda Pierce, and the representative from Heritage Properties, LLC, a nondescript man in his 30s, who looked nervous even before I arrived. Sarah's face went white, actually white. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly, I thought she might faint. She recovered within seconds, that practiced mask snapping back into place. But I had seen the fear, the recognition that something was very, very wrong. "Mrs. Harrison," Amanda the realtor said, clearly confused. "I wasn't aware you would be joining us today. Is there a problem with the sale?" "Several problems, actually," I said calmly, setting my briefcase on the table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "But we'll get to those momentarily." Sarah's lawyer leaned forward, his expression sharp and professional. "Mrs. Harrison, this is highly irregular. The parties to this sale are Mr. Matthew Harrison and Mrs. Sarah Harrison. Unless you have legal standing—" "I do." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the first document, the original purchase agreement for this property. As you'll see on page 4, paragraph 12, my late husband and I provided 40% of the down payment, which was $85,000. The agreement specifically states that as partial financiers of the property, we retain certain rights, including but not limited to approval of any sale and the right to be present at closing proceedings. I slid copies of the document across the table. Sarah's lawyer picked it up, read it quickly, and his expression shifted slightly. He knew I was right. "Furthermore," I continued, "I'm here to present evidence that this sale is being conducted fraudulently and is designed to financially harm my son while benefiting Mrs. Sarah Harrison and her accomplice." The word accomplice hung in the air like smoke. "That's an extremely serious accusation," Richard Thornton said carefully. "I hope you have substantial evidence to support such a claim, Mrs. Harrison, because slander is also a serious legal matter." "Oh, I have evidence." I reached into my briefcase again. Substantial evidence, irrefutable evidence, the kind of evidence that will hold up in both civil and criminal court. I began distributing folders, one to Sarah, whose hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it, one to her lawyer, one to the realtor, one to the Heritage Properties representative, who looked like he wanted to run from the room, and one I kept for myself. "What is this?" Sarah asked, but her voice had changed. The sweetness was gone, replaced by something harder, more desperate. "The truth," I said simply. "The truth I tried to tell my son 3 months ago. The truth that everyone dismissed as paranoia and grief. The truth that you've been hiding behind lies and manipulation." Sarah opened her folder. I watched her face as she saw the first page, a photograph of her and Derek Chambers at a restaurant, leaning close together, his hand on hers. Her eyes widened. She flipped to the next page, another photograph, this time of them entering a hotel. Then another, and another, time-stamped, dated, undeniable. "These are—" she started, then stopped. What could she say? The photographs spoke for themselves. "Surveillance photographs documenting your affair with Derek Chambers," I said, my voice steady and clear. "A relationship that began 6 months ago at a real estate development conference in Chicago. You met on March 14th at the Hilton downtown. Your first intimate encounter was on March 16th at the Fairmont Hotel. Since then, you've met with Mr. Chambers 47 times at various locations, always when my son was working or traveling." Richard Thornton was reading through the folder rapidly, his professional composure cracking slightly. "Mrs. Harrison, while adultery is certainly grounds for divorce, it doesn't necessarily constitute fraud in a property sale." "Page 12, I interrupted. "Financial documents showing that Heritage Properties LLC is owned by Derek Chambers." Page 15, "The property appraisal completed last month showing this house is worth $375,000. Page 18, "The sales contract showing Heritage Properties is purchasing the property for $230,000. That's a loss of $145,000. A loss that my son knows nothing about because his wife," I looked directly at Sarah, "has been handling all the details while telling him the house is selling for market value." The room was completely silent, except for the rustle of papers as everyone absorbed this information. "That's not all," I continued, pulling out another document. "Pages 20 through 24 are transcripts of recorded conversations between Sarah and Derek Chambers, discussing their plan to sell the house below market value, take the proceeds, and relocate to Portland together. These recordings were obtained legally from devices installed in the common areas of the property, which I have partial ownership of, and therefore the right to monitor." I pulled out a small digital recorder and set it on the table. "Would you like me to play them? I have particularly clear audio of Sarah saying, and I quote, 'Just a few more months of playing the perfect wife, and we'll have everything. Matthew's so trusting. He believes every word I say.'" Sarah's face had gone from white to red. "You had no right to spy on me. This is an invasion of privacy." "Actually, I had every right. As Margaret Wells, my attorney, will confirm, and she's prepared to testify, the recordings were obtained legally. But please, by all means, let's discuss invasion of privacy. Let's discuss how you invaded my son's trust, his home, his life. Let's discuss how you've been lying to him every single day while planning to steal everything he's worked for." Richard Thornton held up his hand. "Mrs. Harrison, I think we need to pause this proceeding. Sarah, I need to speak with you privately." "No," I said firmly. "We're not pausing anything. There are 2 more documents you need to see." I pulled out the second to last folder. "This is a cease and desist order filed this morning at 8 a.m. with the county clerk's office, freezing this sale pending investigation of fraud. The order is signed by Judge Patricia Morrison and is legally binding." Amanda the realtor stood up. If there's a legal freeze on this property, this closing cannot proceed. I'm sorry, but I have to terminate this meeting immediately. Wait, Sarah said desperately. She turned to me, and for the first time, tears appeared in her eyes. Real or fake, I couldn't tell and didn't care. Please, you don't understand. Derek and I, it's not what it looks like. We're friends, just friends. These photographs are taken out of context. Friends who book hotel rooms together? I asked coldly. Friends who plan to steal my son's money and run away together. Those kinds of friends. I love Matthew, she insisted, and the audacity of the lie made my hands clench into fists under the table. I would never hurt him. You're doing this because you're jealous. You've never liked me. You couldn't stand that Matthew chose me instead of staying with you. Is that what you're going with? I asked. The jealous mother-in-law defense? Tell me, Sarah, will that explanation satisfy Derek Chambers' wife when she receives copies of all this evidence? Oh, did you not know Derek was married? He has been for 12 years, has 2 children. Jennifer Chambers, lovely woman. Very interested in meeting you, I'm sure. Sarah's face crumbled completely. Whatever mask she had been wearing, whatever performance she had been giving, collapsed entirely, and beneath it was something ugly and desperate and furious. You bitter old bitch, she hissed. You couldn't stand that Matthew loved me more than you. You couldn't stand that I was his future and you were just his past. So you did this. You destroyed everything because you're alone and miserable, and you wanted him to be alone and miserable too. No, I said quietly. I did this because I love my son. Because protecting him from people like you is what mothers do. Even when it costs us everything. Even when no one believes us. Even when we have to fight alone. I pulled out the final document. This is a civil lawsuit filed against you and Derek Chambers for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's also a criminal complaint that will be delivered to the district attorney's office this afternoon. You can expect to be contacted by law enforcement very soon. Richard Thornton stood up. Sarah, we're leaving. Now, don't say another word. They left, Sarah stumbling slightly, her lawyer's hand on her arm, guiding her out. She tried to look back at me once, but Richard pulled her through the door. The Heritage Properties representative practically ran from the room. Amanda the realtor gathered her papers with trembling hands. Mrs. Harrison, I had no idea. Heritage Properties seemed completely legitimate. I know, I said. They were counting on that. When everyone had left, I sat alone in that conference room for a long moment. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with me. I had done it. I had exposed her. I had stopped the fraud. I had protected my son. But the hardest part was still to come. Because now I had to face Matthew and hope that this time, finally, he would believe me. Matthew returned from Seattle late on November 16th. I know because I was watching his house from my car parked down the street, waiting for him to come home. I had called him several times throughout the day, but he hadn't answered. I left one message, keeping it simple. Matthew, something happened at the closing yesterday. I need to see you as soon as you get back. Please, it's important. His car pulled into the driveway at 8:30 that evening. The house was dark. Sarah wasn't there. She hadn't been there since the closing, I knew, because I had been checking periodically. She had packed a bag and gone somewhere, probably to Derek's, though that relationship was likely falling apart now too. I waited 5 minutes after Matthew went inside, giving him time to realize his wife wasn't home. Then I got out of my car and walked to the front door. My legs felt weak, my heart was pounding, but I made myself move forward. This conversation had to happen. Everything depended on it. I knocked, waited. The door opened, and there was my son. He looked exhausted, confused, older somehow, as if the last 24 hours had aged him. Mom. His voice was flat. What are you doing here? Can I come in? Please, I need to talk to you. He hesitated, then stepped aside. The house felt empty, cold. Not just because Sarah wasn't there, but because something essential had been drained from it. Hope, maybe, or innocence. We sat in the living room, the same room where, just 3 months ago, he had laughed at my warnings, the same room where photographs of him and Sarah still smiled from every surface, though those smiles now seemed like the lies they had always been. Sarah's lawyer called me this morning, Matthew said before I could speak. He told me there was a problem at the closing, that you were there, that you had evidence of... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Of Sarah's affair, I said gently, and of the fraud she was planning to commit against you. He nodded slowly, his eyes focused on his hands. He sent me copies of everything, the photographs, the financial documents, the recordings. His voice cracked on the last word. I listened to her voice, Mom. I heard her talking about me like I was nothing, like I was just a mark, a fool to be used and discarded. Matthew? You tried to tell me. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a pain that broke my heart. 3 months ago, you tried to warn me, and I laughed at you. I called you paranoid. I told you that you needed help. I turned the whole family against you, and you were right. About everything. I moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in mine. You loved her. You trusted her. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's what makes you a good person. How can you say that? He asked bitterly. How can you not hate me for what I did to you? I chose her over you. I believed her lies over your truth. I cut you out of my life when you were trying to save me. Because you're my son, I said simply. And a mother's love doesn't stop just because things get difficult. It doesn't stop when you make mistakes. It doesn't stop when you don't believe us. It endures. It fights. It protects. Always. He broke down then, completely and utterly. Tears streamed down his face as he doubled over, his body shaking with sobs. I held him the way I had when he was a child, letting him cry out all the pain and betrayal and grief. This was the moment I had been fighting for. Not the exposure of Sarah's lies, not the legal victory, but this, being able to comfort my son when he needed me most. We sat like that for a long time, until his tears slowed and his breathing steadied. When he finally pulled away, he looked younger somehow. Vulnerable, lost. I don't understand how I didn't see it, he said. Were there signs? Did I miss something obvious? She was very good at what she did, I said. She didn't just lie to you, Matthew. She manipulated your entire perception of reality. She isolated you from your friends, created distance between you and the people who truly cared about you. That's what predators do. They cut you off from anyone who might see through them. She told me you were jealous, he said, that you couldn't accept that I had moved on from Dad's death, that you needed therapy because you were projecting your grief onto our marriage. And I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. That's because you're not a manipulative person yourself, I told him. You don't think the way she thinks. You couldn't imagine someone being that calculating, that cruel. So when she gave you an explanation that seemed to make sense, you accepted it. Because in your world, people don't do what Sarah did. He was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked, how did you do it? How did you keep going when everyone thought you were crazy? When I thought you were crazy? I considered the question carefully. Because giving up wasn't an option. You're my son, Matthew, my only child, the most important person in my world. I couldn't stand by and watch you be destroyed, even if fighting for you meant losing you temporarily, even if it meant being called paranoid and bitter, even if it meant fighting completely alone. You gathered all that evidence yourself? I hired a private investigator, consulted with a lawyer, installed recording devices in your house, legally I might add, since I'm technically a part owner. I spent 3 months documenting every lie, Every meeting, every piece of the puzzle. Because I knew that words wouldn't be enough. I needed proof that was undeniable. Matthew shook his head in amazement. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. You deserve a mother who fights for you. Just like someday if you have children, you'll fight for them too. That's what love is, Matthew. It's not about being appreciated or recognized. It's about doing what's necessary, even when it's hard. Over the next several days, the full scope of Sarah's betrayal became clear. The divorce proceedings were swift. With the evidence I had gathered, her lawyer advised her not to fight anything. She signed away all rights to the house, to Matthew's retirement accounts, to everything. Her only alternative was potential jail time for fraud, which was still a possibility depending on what the district attorney decided to do with the criminal complaint. Derek Chambers' wife, Jennifer, filed for divorce as well. I spoke with her once on the phone, a conversation that was both heartbreaking and validating. She thanked me for exposing the affair, said she had suspected something but hadn't had proof. She was taking Derek for everything he was worth in the divorce, and I hoped she got every penny. Sarah tried to contact Matthew several times in those first weeks. Text messages claiming she could explain that she had made a mistake, that she still loved him. He blocked her number after the third message, on my advice. The family, of course, had to eat humble pie. One by one, they came to me with apologies. My sister Ellen was in tears, begging forgiveness for doubting me. My cousin Patricia brought flowers and a card. My brother-in-law couldn't even look me in the eye when he mumbled his sorry. I accepted their apologies graciously. I understood that Sarah had been very convincing, that people naturally want to believe the best of others, but I also never forgot who had stood by me and who had been quick to judge. Some relationships recovered fully. Others remained polite but distant, and I was okay with that. The experience had taught me something valuable. It's better to have a few people who truly believe in you than a crowd who will turn on you at the first sign of trouble. Matthew didn't sell the house. Instead, he reclaimed it. He spent weeks repainting the walls, changing the furniture arrangement, removing every trace of Sarah's presence. He planted new flowers in the garden. He hung different artwork. He made the space his own again, transforming it from a place of betrayal into a true home. And slowly, painfully, he began to heal. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the failed closing, we were sitting in his newly redesigned kitchen, drinking coffee and talking. The conversation had been light, deliberately avoiding the painful topics, when Matthew suddenly asked, "Do you ever regret it, the way you handled everything?" I thought about it carefully. I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that you were hurt. I regret the 3 months we spent estranged from each other. But do I regret fighting for you, even when you didn't believe me? No, never. Not for a single second. What if I had never believed you? What if the closing had happened before you could stop it? What if she had succeeded? Then I would have kept fighting, I said without hesitation. I would have pursued every legal avenue. I would have gathered more evidence. I would have done whatever it took to help you recover from the financial damage, because that's what love does. It doesn't give up just because the battle is hard or the odds are against you. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant. I hope I can be that strong if I ever have kids. You will be, I assured him. You already are. You're going through something incredibly painful, and you're handling it with grace and maturity. You're not letting it make you bitter or closed off. You're healing and learning and growing stronger. That takes tremendous courage. I learned it from you, he said quietly. Watching how you handled these last few months. Mom, I don't think I've ever been more in awe of anyone in my life. You were right, and you were strong, and you never gave up. Even when I was awful to you. You weren't awful, you were deceived. There's a difference. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, and I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. My son was safe. The truth had prevailed. Our relationship was not just restored, but stronger than before. That's not to say everything was perfect. Matthew still had moments of doubt and pain. Sometimes he would talk about Sarah, about the woman he thought she was, about the future they had planned. He was grieving, and I let him grieve. Because mourning someone who never actually existed is a strange and complex kind of loss. But he was moving forward. One day at a time, one step at a time, he was reclaiming his life. Have you ever had to fight for someone who didn't believe you needed to fight for them? Have you ever stood alone for a truth that no one else could see? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight in silence, but they're also the ones that matter most. Spring arrived slowly that year, as if the world itself was hesitant to move forward after so much pain. 6 months had passed since the failed closing, since the day I had walked into that conference room and detonated the truth like a bomb. 6 months since Sarah's carefully constructed lies had shattered under the weight of evidence. Matthew was doing better, not healed. Wounds that deep don't heal in half a year, but better. He had started dating again, cautiously, and I could see the wariness in his eyes when he talked about potential relationships. Sarah had left scars that would take years to fade. I was working in my garden on a Tuesday afternoon in April when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Harrison? A woman's voice, professional but carrying an undercurrent of emotion. Yes, who is this? My name is Jennifer Chambers. I'm Derek Chambers' wife. Ex-wife now, I should say. The divorce was finalized last week. I straightened up, pulling off my gardening gloves. Mrs. Chambers, how can I help you? I wanted to call and thank you, actually. What you did, exposing the affair and the fraud, you didn't just save your son. You saved me, too. I had suspected something was wrong, but I didn't have proof. You gave me the courage to leave a man who was lying to me, stealing from me, making a fool of me. I'm glad I could help, even inadvertently. I'm sorry for what you went through. Don't be. I'm better off without him. She paused. But that's not the only reason I called. I thought you should know what happened to Derek and Sarah. You deserve to know how their story ended. I sat down on my garden bench, suddenly very interested. Tell me. Their relationship fell apart within 6 weeks of them running off together. Turns out, when you build a relationship on lies and deception and the destruction of other people's lives, it doesn't have a very strong foundation. Her voice carried a note of satisfaction that I understood completely. What happened? Sarah had convinced Derek that your son was abusive, that she needed to escape, that the house sale was her only way out. Derek genuinely believed he was helping a woman in danger. He's not a good person, Mrs. Harrison, but he's not quite as calculating as Sarah is. When he realized she had lied about everything, that she had manipulated him just as much as she had manipulated your son, he was furious. They had a falling out? A spectacular one. Apparently, Sarah tried to convince Derek to marry her immediately after both divorces were final. She had this whole plan mapped out. They'd get married, combine their assets, start a new life together. But Derek had finally figured out what she was. He told her no. Told her he wanted nothing to do with her. And when Sarah realized her meal ticket was gone, she showed her true colors. What did she do? Threatened him. Said she'd claim he had coerced her, that she was a victim, that she'd go to the police with stories about him. Derek recorded these conversations, guess he learned something from your example, and played them for his lawyer. Sarah's already facing fraud charges. Adding attempted blackmail and extortion to that list was just icing on the cake. I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Not joy exactly, but justice. The sense that the universe had a way of balancing the scales. Where is she now? Last I heard, she's living in a small apartment 2 states over. working retail. Derek said she tried to run similar scams on a few other men she met online, but word gets around in certain circles. Nobody wants to be the next fool. She's been essentially blacklisted from the dating scene in several cities. We talked for a few more minutes. Jennifer told me about her own healing process, about how she was rebuilding her life with her 2 children, about the settlement she had gotten from Derek that would secure their future. She sounded strong, resilient, like someone who had walked through fire and come out tempered rather than burned. After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, thinking about Sarah, about how her greed and manipulation had ultimately destroyed not just other people's lives, but her own, about how the trap she had set for Matthew had become a trap for herself. I told Matthew about the phone call that evening over dinner. He listened quietly, his expression neutral, and when I finished, he simply said, "Good." But I could see in his eyes that it wasn't really good. It was just necessary. Justice had been served, but it didn't undo the pain or erase the betrayal. It didn't give him back the time he had lost or the trust that had been shattered. "You know what the worst part is?" he said after a long silence. "I still sometimes miss the person I thought she was. I know it was all fake, that she was playing a role, but my feelings were real. My love was real. And mourning someone who never actually existed is the strangest kind of grief." "That's very wise," I said, "and very honest. You're allowed to grieve what you lost, Matthew, even if what you lost was an illusion. The pain is still real. Do you think she ever actually cared about me at all? Even a little bit?" I considered lying, offering him some comfort. But Matthew deserved the truth, even when it hurt. "I don't know. Maybe at the beginning there was some genuine affection. But Sarah is someone who fundamentally sees people as tools to be used for her own benefit. Whatever feelings she might have had were overwhelmed by her own selfishness and greed." He nodded, accepting this. "I've been thinking a lot about trust lately, about how to trust again after something like this. How do you open yourself up to someone when you know how badly it can go wrong?" "Very carefully," I said. "Very slowly, with your eyes wide open and your instincts engaged. But you do it, Matthew, because the alternative is to let Sarah win. To let her steal, not just your money, but your ability to love and trust. And I won't let that happen. Neither should you." The legal proceedings concluded around this time as well. Sarah pled guilty to fraud charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 2 years probation, restitution payments she would probably never be able to afford, and a permanent record that would follow her for the rest of her life. Derek faced similar charges and similar consequences. The civil lawsuit I had filed was settled out of court. Sarah had no assets to speak of, but Derek's company paid damages to Matthew that more than covered any financial losses he had incurred. It wasn't about the money, really. It was about accountability, about making sure there were real consequences for what they had done. As spring turned to summer, I watched Matthew gradually come back to life. The shadows under his eyes faded. His smile came more easily. He started spending time with friends again, reconnecting with the people Sarah had tried to drive away. He even started talking about his career goals again, making plans for the future instead of just surviving the present. One Saturday in June, I was at his house helping him plant vegetables in his garden, something he had never done before but wanted to learn, when he suddenly stopped digging and looked at me. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for fighting for me even when I didn't deserve it, for being stronger than I was, for showing me what real love looks like." I set down my trowel and took his dirt-covered hand in mine. "You did deserve it, Matthew. You've always deserved it, and you always will. That's what being a mother means. It means fighting for your children no matter what, no matter the cost." "I won't forget again," he promised. I won't ever doubt you again." "You might," I said honestly. "Humans make mistakes. We doubt. We question. We sometimes believe the wrong people, but that's okay. Because now you know that even when you doubt me, even when you push me away, I'll still be here. I'll still fight for you." That's what real love does. It endures. We finished planting the garden as the sun set, and I looked at my son, this good, kind, wounded man who was learning to trust again, learning to hope again, and I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle had been hard. The cost had been high. But we had won, not just against Sarah, but against the damage she had tried to inflict on our relationship, on Matthew's ability to love and trust. Evil had tried to win, and for a while it had looked like it might, but in the end, truth and love had prevailed. They always do, if you're willing to fight for them. Today, 3 years after that frozen moment in the hallway, when I heard Sarah's voice plotting my son's destruction, I sit in my garden on a warm October afternoon, surrounded by the chrysanthemums I planted last spring, and I can finally look back on everything with something approaching peace. Matthew is remarried now. Her name is Claire, and she is everything Sarah pretended to be. Genuine, kind, honest, strong. When Matthew first introduced us, I'll admit I was wary. How could I not be? I had seen firsthand how convincing a liar could be, how manipulation could wear the mask of love. But Claire proved herself over and over, not through grand gestures, but through consistent, genuine kindness. The first time we met, Claire looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Matthew told me everything about Sarah, about what happened, about what you did for him. That took incredible courage and love. I hope I can earn your trust." And she has. Over 3 years, through 1,000 small actions and words, she has proven that she sees my son as a person to cherish, not a resource to exploit. They have a daughter now, Emma. She's 18 months old, with Matthew's eyes and Claire's infectious laugh. When she calls me Nana in her sweet, stumbling toddler voice, I feel my heart expand in ways I didn't know were possible. This child exists because I fought for her father, because I refused to give up when everyone told me I was wrong. The house that Sarah tried to steal is now filled with the sounds of a real family. Emma's toys scattered in the living room, Claire's paintings on the walls, laughter and music and life, all the things that make a house a home. Sometimes when I visit, I remember that terrible day when I stood in the hallway and overheard the plot to destroy all of this before it could exist. And I feel grateful, so deeply grateful that I trusted my instincts. But I would be dishonest if I said the experience didn't change me fundamentally. I'm more cautious now, more aware of the masks people wear, slower to trust, quicker to listen to that quiet voice inside that whispers warnings. I've learned that sometimes the people with the brightest smiles hide the darkest intentions. That manipulation can look exactly like kindness. That betrayal can wear the face of love and speak the language of devotion. I've also learned something else, something perhaps more important, that standing up for the truth, even when no one believes you, even when it costs you your reputation and your relationships and your peace of mind, is not just the right thing to do. It's the only thing to do, because the alternative is to watch someone you love be destroyed while you remain silent, and I could never have lived with that. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry about what Sarah did, about the months of being called paranoid and bitter, about being cut out of my son's life while I was trying to save it, about being mocked and dismissed and treated like I was losing my mind. The answer is no. I'm not angry anymore. Anger is exhausting and it gives power to people who don't deserve it. Anger would mean that Sarah still had some hold over me, some influence on my emotional state, and I refuse to give her that satisfaction. What I am is grateful. Grateful that I overheard that phone call. Grateful that I had the resources to hire an investigator and a lawyer. Grateful that I had the strength to gather evidence instead of giving up. Grateful that I fought when fighting seemed hopeless. Grateful that our story had a happy ending when it could so easily have ended in tragedy. I think sometimes about the alternative timeline, the version of events where I didn't arrive at Matthew's house early that day, where I didn't overhear Sarah's conversation, where her plan succeeded, the house was sold at a fraudulent price, and she disappeared with Derek and my son's money, where Matthew's life was destroyed and I never knew why, or worse, where I knew but couldn't prove it, couldn't save him, could only watch helplessly as he suffered. That alternate reality haunts me occasionally, late at night when I can't sleep. But it also reminds me why what I did mattered, why every sleepless night, every whispered insult, every moment of doubt and isolation was worth enduring. A mother's love is tested in ways we don't anticipate when we first hold our children. We're tested when they make choices we don't understand. We're tested when they push us away or when they believe someone else's lies over our truth. We're tested when protecting them means becoming the villain in someone else's narrative, when saving them costs us our reputation, when fighting for them means fighting alone. But here's what I learned through all of it, what I want you to understand if you're facing your own battle right now. Love isn't about being liked or appreciated or understood in the moment. It's about doing what's necessary for the people we love, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when everyone thinks we're wrong, even when our own children doubt us. The truth is a powerful thing. It might be delayed, it might be doubted, it might be dismissed and mocked and buried under layers of lies, but it always, eventually, comes to light. The earth has a way of rejecting poison, of pushing truth to the surface no matter how deep it's been buried. And when that truth finally emerges, those who stood for it will be vindicated, and those who tried to suppress it will be exposed. If you're going through something similar right now, if you know a truth that no one believes, if you're fighting a battle alone, if you've been made to feel crazy for trusting your instincts, please, don't give up. Document everything. Stay calm, be strategic, gather evidence, consult professionals, build your case methodically and carefully. And remember that the truth is on your side, even when nothing and no one else is. Trust your gut, that instinct that tells you something is wrong. Listen to it. It's there for a reason. Our bodies, our subconscious minds, they pick up on signals that our conscious thoughts might miss or dismiss. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong, even if you can't immediately articulate why. I look at my son now, truly happy with a woman who loves him genuinely, with a daughter who will grow up safe and protected in a home built on honesty instead of deception. And I know with absolute certainty that every painful moment was worth it. Every sleepless night, every whispered insult, every family gathering where I was treated like I was unstable, every second of doubt and isolation and fear. Worth it. All of it. Because love won, truth won, and the family that could have been destroyed is instead thriving. That's not revenge. That's justice. And sometimes justice is the sweetest victory of all, not because it punishes our enemies, but because it protects the people we love. Sarah destroyed herself in the end, not because I sought revenge or wished her harm, but because a life built on lies eventually collapses under its own weight. The universe has a way of bringing consequences to those who harm others intentionally and systematically. I didn't need to engineer Sarah's downfall. I just needed to expose the truth and let nature take its course. There's a lesson in that, I think. We don't need to become monsters to fight monsters. We don't need to descend to their level or use their tactics. We just need to be persistent, to be thorough, to gather evidence and present truth and trust that justice, though sometimes slow, is ultimately inevitable. The scars remain, of course. Matthew is more cautious in relationships now. He watches for red flags. he trusts his instincts more and his initial impressions less. He understands now that not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well, that some people are predators who see kindness as weakness and trust as opportunity. But those scars haven't made him bitter. They've made him wiser, stronger, more discerning. He's able to love fully while also protecting himself appropriately. And that balance between openness and caution, between trust and wisdom, that's the real victory. Sarah tried to destroy his ability to love and trust. Instead, she taught him how to love and trust more intelligently. As I sit here in my garden, watching the sun set on another beautiful day, watching through my window as Matthew pulls into my driveway with Claire and Emma for Sunday dinner, a tradition we reinstated and that now carries only joy instead of the tension that existed when Sarah was part of our lives. I feel a profound sense of completeness. I fought for my son. I stood for truth when standing for truth cost me everything. I refused to give up even when giving up would have been so much easier. And now, years later, I can see the fruits of that battle, a family whole and happy, a son who understands the depth of a mother's love, a granddaughter who will grow up protected by parents who have learned hard lessons about trust and deception. If this story has touched you, if you've experienced betrayal or had to fight for someone you love against impossible odds, I want to hear from you. Your comments, your stories, your experiences, they matter more than you know. Share in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand alone for a truth no one else believed? Have you ever fought a battle that cost you everything but was still worth fighting? Subscribe to this channel if you want to be part of a community where we share real stories about real struggles and real triumphs, where we support each other through the battles that no one else understands, where we remind each other that truth and love and persistence can overcome even the most sophisticated deception. Because here's what I know for certain now, what I learned through fire and emerged believing with every fiber of my being. The truth always wins, always. It might take time, it might require patience and strategy and evidence and faith, but it always, eventually, prevails. Trust your instincts, stand for the truth, gather your evidence, build your case, and never, ever stop fighting for the people you love, even when they don't believe you, even when they push you away, even when everyone thinks you're wrong. Because someday, when the truth finally comes to light, they'll understand. They'll see what you saw. They'll know what you knew. And they'll be grateful that you loved them enough to fight for them, even when they didn't want you to. That's what real love looks like. Not the fairy tale version, not the easy version, but the true version. The version that endures, the version that fights, the version that wins. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this community where truth matters and love matters and fighting for what's right matters. Remember, you are stronger than you think. Your instincts are more reliable than you know. And the truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way to surface. Now go forward and fight your own battles with courage and wisdom and relentless love. The world needs more people who refuse to stay silent when they see injustice, who refuse to give up when everyone tells them they're wrong, who love so deeply they're willing to stand alone if that's what love requires. Be that person, fight that fight, win that war, because you can, because you must, because love demands it.